Hello, great and bountiful YouTube empire. I'm Chiinferno, and happy Mother's Day. This is a piece I made for my mom this Mother's Day, starring one of my characters who I know she likes, and that frankly I need to spotlight a bit more. Buckishiro. He's the little woodland creature. He is a species of rodent known as an overrat, and this particular overrat seems to be fairly intelligent. In the story of this image, a young Buckishiro was wandering through the sacred forest when he stumbled upon a ruined automaton known as AXEL. For now, I'll leave the nature of how AXEL ended up here in this position a mystery. I don't want to spoil all of my stories, but AXEL was a weapon designed to fight against a world-ending threat known as the Shadow. The idea of Buckishiro discovering AXEL like this has been in my head for a long time, but this is the first time I've put the idea to page. So let's dive in. As often happens, I got a little ahead of myself and started working on the line art before I actually started recording the video. Fortunately, I didn't lose too much of the process as I quickly remembered to start recording, but here's the original sketch, and a very rough color concept which mostly ended up being a brush test. Then I resumed the line art for AXEL. One thing I did a little bit different this time around was utilizing different colors while sketching out different parts of his body. I mostly did this for personal visibility as I was having a bit of trouble focusing on each limb at this time around. I've always wanted to be one of those guys that can draw all these cool sorts of mecha, but it's something that's never really been my strong suit, or at least it's a skill I'm still building on. When I initially designed AXEL, I wanted him to have a more distinctive and different sort of shape and design than what you typically see in robots, so that's what led to his rather expansive power core. I took a lot of inspiration from the design of the Reploid characters in Mega Man ZX and ZX Advent, though some of those inspirations may be a bit more evident on some of the other characters from AXEL's adventures who aren't shown here. And it's maybe a bit on the nose, but AXEL's hat and horns were inspired by the hat worn by the Animal Crossing villager in the original game. It goes without saying, but due to his broken down state, I had the opportunity to play around with roughing up AXEL's clothes significantly. Buckishiro is a fun character. I'll be honest though, the younger form, although quickly becoming the version of him I've drawn the most, isn't my favorite version of Buckishiro. It's a version of him I made out of necessity, but to me it doesn't quite feel like he's him yet. I have around 3 or 4 different versions of Buckishiro designed throughout his lifespan, and in my head his main design is the one that makes an appearance in my upcoming YA novel, Trial by Fire Academy. That story features a somewhat older version of Buckishiro, and he gets a little hat to wear too. Buckishiro is a remnant that's managed to stick around from what I refer to as my second era of the Land of Trey. He was created long ago while I was still in middle school. And the deepest and darkest held secret about Buckishiro is that he's actually a fakemon. Initially, when my stories were more personal explorations, and I leaned more into fan works of existing IPs rather than having everything be my own creative expression, I had written a comic in my series at the time known as The Boy with the Grey Eyes, though now a bit more succinctly known as Grey Smoke, where my original characters played out a rough adaptation of the events of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. And I know I said that Buckishiro was a fakemon and that was his deep dark secret, but the real secret about Buckishiro is he was actually supposed to be a pair of binoculars. In the story, the protagonist Jun Kamino was riding into the Sinnoh region on a boat, and I had intended to depict the boat with a set of those tourism binoculars attached to the side where you could put a coin in to look through them. Unfortunately, I wasn't particularly skilled at drawing well-detailed backgrounds at the time, and my attempt to draw these binoculars was done so poorly that I decided instead to give it life and turn it into my own original Pokemon creature. And that is the truth about how Buckishiro was born. Just don't tell anybody. That story is a little embarrassing. I've started roughly sketching the background. I'm still working on getting better at them, and I've never been too fond of drawing trees, but considering they're in a forest, I knew I couldn't avoid that. But for sanity's sake, and because I was on a bit of a tight schedule, I just decided to keep things relatively simple in the hopes that the texture details I'd be adding later would help bring the forest to life. That's actually the secret of drawing trees. It's not really too much about the shape, it's about the texture. And then it was time to move on to coloring. Buckishiro's colors are pretty simple. The most complicated thing about him is his beaded necklace. AXEL, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. and the forest background was also a bit simple initially. Now, here you're seeing a big cut, and that's a shame too, because this was probably one of the more significant parts of the process for you to be able to see. Unfortunately, I lost about 30 minutes of footage, my entire tree texturing process, due to a minor issue I've had with my recording software where it records the wrong application. So now I just have a 30-minute video of the Microsoft Feedback Hub, which has no value to this video at all. So now we'll move on to shading again. Pretty simple and standard fare. I started with Buckishiro, carving out the shadows, adding the lighting, fill, and rim lights before doing the same with AXEL. Oh, and here's where I realized that I forgot to color the sleeve of his arm. And here I thought I'd go a bit extra, and I made a reflection of Buckishiro on his power core. Getting it positioned just right was a bit of a challenge, but I love the effect, and I think it adds a lot to the piece, even if it turned out a little bit subtle. Then it was time to dirty him up. I was tempted to leave him pristine because I really like how that looked, but I knew in my heart he needed to be naturally covered with grime and just look really rough. So I got to work adding some smudges and dirt textures all over him. There wasn't any real method to it, I just experimented with different brushes, played it by ear, and kept what worked. Then I did some quick and relatively simple shading of the background, and added a small spotlight through the canopy with a mild dappling effect to imply the leaf coverage. Then I tossed in the logo and my signature, and finally the piece was finished. Here's how the final version turned out. I'll admit, I wound up being a bit surprised at how quickly I managed to throw this thing together. In the end, it only took me about 4 hours and 40 minutes total over the course of a few days. I'm really happy with how it turned out. The version you're seeing here looks slightly different from the one I worked on because this is the version I adjusted to fit a 16:9 aspect ratio. The original version I painted was designed so I could print it as a poster. I wanted to have a slightly more painterly style than my usual work, and I think for the most part I achieved that, though I maybe could have put a bit of extra texture on Buckishiro. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe. As always, you can view the final versions over in my community tab. Never forget that you matter. You are enough. Happy Mother's Day. This is Chiinferno signing out.